humans, really aren't meant to live in boxes, and I thought about that for a second. It was just kind of an off the cuff remark, but I thought, well, you know what, you live in a box, you go to work in a box for most people. And, humans really aren't wired up for that. I don't believe so. And I think there's just so much more to offer for our mental health, our physical health, to be outside, fresh air, roaming in wild places. And I think that's where humans really, really thrive.
I don't know who you are, but welcome to the Irish Photography Podcast. Sit back, relax, and listen about cameras, gear, settings, stories, and all things photography. Join Darren on Ireland's Best Photography Podcast. Let's go.
And you're very welcome to episode 146 of the Irish Photography Podcast. My name is Darren, I'm your host this evening, and I'm joined by somebody whose name I first came across when I had another guest on the podcast, and I didn't believe that it was real. I didn't believe that he existed, but he does, and I'm delighted to have him on the podcast. So welcome to the Irish Photography Podcast, Dusty Doddridge. How are you getting on, man?
Man, I'm doing great. Just back from a fantastic trip to Iceland, always wild and woolly as ever. And getting ready to head back out in less than a week for our fall workshop circuit. So I'm kind of in between trips, but glad to be home for a few days, and appreciate the opportunity to join you on the podcast.
Well, thanks for coming on, man. I'm really excited to hear your story, and I'm really excited to kind of learn about some recent trips as well, because as you said, you're just back there from Iceland and you went with an Irishman. So I'm sure you had a great, great trip. But even before we get into all of that, Dusty, so can you tell people who is Dusty Doddridge?
I'm a landscape photographer based here in Nashville, Tennessee. My wife and I have been here in Middle Tennessee for about 30 years now. We absolutely love it here. I'm a native Tennessean, which in Nashville is kind of rare these days. Over the past 10 years, people have moved from all over the world, all over the U.S. to Nashville. So it's a very vibrant city. It's a city full of diversity now. And so we've just found a wonderful home here. I started doing photography about 20 years ago, during some backpacking and hiking. And like a lot of people doing landscape photography, you're out in these really amazing places, and you just cannot resist, taking some photos and trying to capture some element of that experience. Mm-hmm. And so that's how I got my start, and then just kind of got hooked on photography from there. You start to want to learn more about the craft. You kind of want to get into the creative side, the expressive side of photography. And so this was in the good old days of 35 millimeter film. Nice. I graduated up to Velvia and Provia slide film, with a grand total of probably 4.5 stops of dynamic range. Mm-hmm, and so, photography was much more challenging in a lot of ways back in those days, but I'm really glad to have had the opportunity to have some roots, in the film world before transitioning over to digital around maybe 2008. Okay. And then maybe around 2010, decided to start a business in photography, focused primarily on small group workshops, but I also do some speaking, some writing, some educational content development, and a little bit of print sales. I'm hoping to do more of that in the coming days, but that's a little bit of my origin story with where I am, where I live, how I got started in photography and the photography business.
Super. And I suppose, you mentioned here in relation to, the landscape point of view, was it always landscape photography that you have done, or did you touch on other genres over time?
No, it's a great question. I grew up being outside all the time. Played sports. My family was involved in fishing and those kinds of things. So I just grew up, outside. And, I remember a few years ago talking to a colleague, and we were talking about being outside and those kinds of things in sports. And he kind of paused and looked at me for a second, and he said, humans, really aren't meant to live in boxes, and I thought about that for a second. It was just kind of an off the cuff remark, but I thought, well, you know what, you live in a box, you go to work in a box for most people. And humans really aren't wired up for that. I don't believe so. And I think there's just so much more to offer for our mental health, our physical health, to be outside, fresh air, roaming in wild places. And I think that's where humans really thrive. And so I don't know, I've just always gravitated towards that outdoor adventure kind of experience. And landscape photography became a part of that, and then evolved into something that was a real driver for that. And
Hmm.
so I don't know, I've never had a lot of interest in exploring other genres. I've done a little bit of sports, dabbled in that. A good buddy of mine somehow talked me into photographing his wedding when
Hmm.
I tried with all my might to resist that,
Hmm.
and it did it anyway. But I
Okay.
just cannot, it's just too complicated. I think it's just that I have really limited brain power, and
Okay. Yeah.
anything else outside of landscape would just be way too complicated for my limited brain power to take on.
I'm similar to that. I mean, people ask me, would I do, weddings or communions or confirmations and such like that? And I'm saying no. And the reason why is I don't need to pose a rock. A rock will be there for me, whereas I have to pose a human. And the human to me is far too dynamic and is going to move around so much. And I have to flap around with shutter speeds and everything else. And I couldn't do a wedding because I'd have the fear of me going, you get one shot at this. If you mess this up, you're hardly going to bring everybody back again just so you can get those shots again. So no, it was just be fear factor too much for me. I'll stick with the landscape, stick with the outdoor.
Yeah, way too much pressure with that wedding stuff, man. And I tell people kind of tongue in cheek all the time, I don't shoot anything that moves, unless it's clouds or water,
Hmm.
because it's just
Hmm.
it's just way too complicated. So, but yeah, I just focus on the landscape, and that's what really gets me going, and that's what gets me motivated.
Mm. And when you talk about landscape, there was one particular place I believe you went to was a trip to Sweden. And what was it about the trip to Sweden that particularly grabbed you?
Yeah, boy, that was probably my first extended backpacking trip, and that's really
Okay.
what got me back outdoors. It got me really started in photography in a lot of ways, and so actually, a friend of mine's father, we were visiting, and he had always wanted to do some backpacking up in the north of Sweden, which was above the Arctic Circle, and I was just kind of on the front end of trying to get back active outdoors. And so we spent a while and planned a couple of backpacking trips up there. And
Nice.
I think, you're talking about a 10-day to 14-day backpack in a couple of cases of the trips that we took up there. And it's just an opportunity to have everything you need in life on your back, literally.
Hmm. Hmm.
And there's a certain amount of freedom and a certain amount of independence and a certain amount of self-sufficiency that you have in a backpacking experience. It's really hard to duplicate otherwise, and so we didn't need any food resupply. So we essentially had everything we needed for the next 10 to 14 days of our lives. And I just found that freedom and independence to just be wonderful. And then I think the other element of that, when you get to sort of really truly wild places, there's a pristine nature. It's mostly untouched by human hand, and that's kind of a rare thing these days. And
It is.
so it's just I don't know. I'm just very thankful to have had those opportunities to be in places like that, and just to connect with places that are truly wild. You're off trail, at least in one of the trips that we took. So you're just navigating on your own through river valleys, up over mountain ridges, those kinds of things. And so you're not on a trail. There's no evidence of human impact on the landscape, and just truly wild and rugged places. And that just sort of pristine beauty just kind of works its way into your soul in a lot of ways. And I don't know, that just really captivated me. And, I think far north photography is special because the light, that low angled light,
Hmm.
uh, is just hard to duplicate anywhere else. If you're up there in midsummer, which we were on a couple of those trips, I mean, you've got this 3 and 4 hour sunset sunrise. So the sun is basically just kind of bouncing along low on the horizon for
Hmm.
hours
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
hours. And even in midday, it's still fairly low on the horizon. And you have this sort of wildly changing light and the clouds and the landscape interacting all together. And it really is just a very dynamic and magical place that far north. So yeah, it was just it was a sort of a life-changing experience, or a real tipping point for me personally.
Yeah, I can see that, because a few friends of mine have been to the Arctic Circle in the summer and you get the midnight sun. And it's something that I couldn't get my head around. But then when you start thinking about it as to why the sun comes down and never really sets below the horizon, all of a sudden comes back up again, it's just as captivating. And if you get nice light, which in reality you are going to get nice light, it's like the never ending sunset. It's like all the dreams come together because the sunset will merge straight into sunrise and off you go again. And that, I think, in itself is captivating. But to be able to photograph that then with a camera brings a whole different world into that again completely. So, like, with that in mind, you're starting out in photography. If you go
Right.
back there now and knowing what you know now, it would be a completely different thing again, I imagine.
Yeah, it really would. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I was just trying, to survive.
Hmm. Hmm.
So photographs were kind of, I had the camera, had maybe one, two lenses at the most, but in some of those areas up there, you're crossing these rivers. They're glacial fed rivers, so that's probably the most dangerous part, of the trip. And you through books and reports, this is 20 years ago, so information is pretty sparse. So you're
Yeah.
trying to figure out, where exactly is the safest place to cross these rivers. And in some instances, you're walking up to the banks on these rivers, and you can actually hear boulders rolling, bouncing, in the bottom of the river, and you're just like, whoa, this is really intense. Let's go find another place to cross the river.
Mm.
And so there's a lot of, I think, sort of fear of the unknown, and if it's a unique experience, you haven't done it before, so you're really trying to be smart, trying to minimize risk, and trying to enjoy the adventure. And photography is just like, oh yeah, let's take out the camera, when we set up camp, and those kinds of things. But
Wow.
yeah, I was lucky to be able to go back actually last March,
Oh, okay. Good.
right before things shut down, and took a
Yeah.
winter backpacking cross country ski trip again with my buddy Irish Rob.
Okay.
And never having skied before in my life,
Oh,
uh,
gee.
going above the Arctic Circle in winter,
Wow.
right? So that's another kind of level of risk
Madness.
and crazy storms. And I
Yeah.
don't really, and by the way, I don't really like cold weather. There's that.
Okay.
But yeah, we had this extraordinary time, man. I mean, they have this hut system in Sweden and Norway,
Hmm.
and we managed to make it over to a hut in Norway. And the remarkable thing is, in Norway, in their entire mountain hut system across the country, there's one key that unlocks every single hut, right? At least in theory. So
Okay.
Rob had paid his $5 or whatever it was, some minimal amount of money, and had this key. So we arrived at this really remote, you're probably 30, 40 miles off pavement at this point. We arrived at this hut, it's locked, and he pulls out this metal key, and sure enough, man, it unlocks the hut, and in we go. And
Wow.
inside the hut, you have like a wood burning stove,
Hmm.
you have bunk beds and all this. And you have the reindeer herders who, in wintertime, they supply the mountain huts with firewood. So
Okay.
we actually had these bags of firewood that we could use to heat up the hut, and to melt snow for drinking water every day, and to cook with. So we were positioned in this valley right on the border of Sweden and Norway, and could stay in the hut, get out of these crazy winter storms, and wait for the weather to get a little bit better, and go out on our cross country skis and explore a new valley each day. So we had 5 nights in this remote mountain hut above the Arctic Circle in winter on the border of
Wow.
Sweden and Norway. And it was just a magical experience. I don't know that I could describe it in words, or even if the photographs would do that kind of place justice. Again, just magical light, snow-covered mountains, snow-covered valleys. And in spite of the fact that I had no idea how to cross-country ski, uh, still managed to survive without any orthopedic surgery that was required.
Wow. But isn't it a great system when you think of it, that you got the one key that will open it up. You've got your basic rations and supplies, as you say, to stay alive.
Yep.
Now, I mean, like we have a couple of those here in Ireland, but they're not majorly known because we don't have high mountains. Our highest mountain is 1,000 meters. So
Right.
that's a hill to a number 3,000 feet, let's just say. But that's a hill to a lot of places. But we have that system, but not in such complexity that you've got so many different areas that you can go to and you can rely on. And if you are, as you say, going through that area, number one, you're not knowing how to ski is crazy. I mean, I can't even fathom that. But you're coming. It's like a mirage. You'll see this and go, "Oh, look at this! There it is. If we can reach this, then we get a bit of respite away from these storms." And like the storms can be horrendously bad, and can catch you out in mountains. Mountain can change in an instant. So they're a welcome, respite to weary travelers that are doing these treks. And but for you to do it in winter and not done it before, I still can't get my head around that. That's mad. Like you're going, do you know what? Yeah, I think I'm going to push myself. What will I do? I'll do something that I've never done before and I don't know how to do it. And I'm sure we'll give it a go. You were lucky you had Irish Rob with you, I suppose, to take care of you.
Absolutely. Yeah. I want to be clear that Irish Rob had been up there a couple of times before in winter, doing some similar kind of adventures. So I relied heavily on his expertise since
Mm.
I had absolutely none,
Hmm.
and it was
Hmm.
just wild because, never having cross country skied before, you clip your boots into the skis and they're locked in there. They don't
Yeah.
pop off. Right. So if
Uh-huh.
you fall, you've got to kind of unwrap your body out of some weird pretzel formation that you're in and somehow pull yourself up with a backpack and camera gear on, or either, which takes a lot of strength,
Mm, yeah.
or either you've got to unclip from your boots, which is not the end of the world, but then now you've got snow and ice that are kind of in that binding and it's hard to get your boots back in. But,
Yeah.
the first day, it was a little bit of a struggle. I think my feet were killing me. I didn't take some aftermarket insoles to put in my ski boots, so I've got flat feet. So that was not a really good combination.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
after the first day, I really didn't fall as much, and my feet bothered me less so, and actually really really enjoyed it. So it turned out to be a really good experience. And as you mentioned, the huts are just kind of lifesavers. I mean, there were a couple storms that were just horrendous. You've got these cabins that have been there for 100 years. And the structure is shaking, under the force of the wind, and it's snowing
Mm.
sideways. Can't see your hand in
Mm.
front of your face. So, but yet some people would go out into that, and I just think, man, I just I could not imagine going
Oh.
out into that kind of weather. But I guess if you grow up in that environment, you're used to it, and you have the equipment, and then you have the skills, to survive and thrive in that kind of environment. It's a different animal. But as an inexperienced person in that kind of environment, I had no interest in going out and whatever it was, 10 degrees Fahrenheit and, whatever, 40, 50 mile an hour wind and snow. It's just like, oh man, that's crazy. I don't want to deal with that.
Wow. Wow. No, fair play to you for doing that trip. I mean, it does sound awesome, and again, to go back there that now that you knew how to take photos as versus the first time that you were there. And actually thinking of that, when you were after you were first there and you said, okay, I'm being bitten by this photography bug and you're learning your craft and learning photography. Did you ever think at that stage that it would become your career?
Oh, that's a great question. I didn't think about that, to be honest. I remember sort of a tipping point in my photography journey. It was in the Great Smoky Mountains, which is I don't know, it's about 3 hours here from Nashville, and this was still in the film days. And it was an early morning. I was next to a cascade by myself, and this light was coming through the forest, and it lit the cascade, and it sort of lit the mist that was coming
Nice.
off the
Yep.
cascade. And then you had the subtle shadows of the rhododendron canopy behind it. And I just thought, wow, that is an amazing sight with very subtle light, kind of
Hmm.
dramatic on the one hand with the spotlighting, but yet also subtle too. Kind of had the best of both worlds. And I thought, man, that's I sure hope I don't screw up this photo. And so it was slide film, got the slides back, whatever, 2 weeks later, and just thought, oh wow, I think this could work out. And just with basic Photoshop skills, tried to make it what I wanted it to be, and actually print it out. And I vividly remember that print rolling off the printer, and having this sort of full circle moment of having this wonderful gift of an experience in nature that really resonated with me, and somehow being able to capture some of that, on a piece of film, to process it, scan it, and then print it out and have some tangible representation of that experience. And it was just kind of in that moment that I thought, you know what, this is what I want to do. This is the coolest thing I think I've experienced. And I don't know what it means to do photography, but I just know that this is something that I want to do more of. So I didn't have any earthly idea about pursuing it as a business or how much time I would invest in it. I just think in that moment, that experience, that photograph, that print, that was a tipping point for me where I haven't looked back since. And I don't know, I just love photography, and I love what it's done for me personally. And I love, sharing experiences and places with other people who have a similar mindset about it.
Very, very interesting. And you've also mentioned that photography allows you to go to and brings you to many, many stunning places around the world. And I'm sure, you've seen a number of things and been able to photograph a number of things over the years. But I know it's a difficult question. Like, it's like asking, who's your favorite child or who's your favorite pet. But do you have a favorite location of the places that photography has allowed you to visit?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think if I could only photograph one place and I'm not able to photograph any other, so it's a hypothetical, but for me, that would be Fall Color in Colorado. It's just, there's a place where we go, that we've been going for, I don't know, about a dozen years or so. There's an aspen grove there west of town that's literally 12 miles long. And it's actually one organism. It's a single organism, but it's a unique place. But you have these massive stark white aspen trunks, and you have this gold, yellow, sometimes orange, and even red color, in the leaves. Depending upon where you are, there might be a massive mountain in the background.
Nice.
But and then you might have snow. So it's just, I don't know. There's something about an aspen grove in Fall Color that is just so striking, so surreal. And it's just a magical place. And I really love photographing forests in general. There are an infinite number of possibilities to photograph in a forest. If you're photographing a lake in front of a mountain, well, it's cool, but there's probably only so many photographs you're going to make in front of that kind of grand scene like that. Whereas
Gotcha.
a forest, it might be hard to photograph. It might be hard to simplify or work out a composition, but I'd much rather go to a place where I can make a bunch of different photographs and enjoy that, rather than go to a place and hope the light works out and hope you get the one photograph that's there.
A number of things, Dusty, come out of that. And I mean, the first thing I'll say to you is I am extremely jealous when I see the autumn colors, or the fall colors, you guys call it in the States, that I see from the States. And Colorado
Yep.
does seem to be an area which is incredible in relation to it. New England, on the other side, seems to be another place which is absolutely stunning. And my wife is American. She's from Wisconsin, and we'd go to the States before we had the kids. We'd go every year. But the last trip that we were there, which was 2 years ago now, we said we'd go there for October. And I said, okay, I want to go for October. I want to try and get the autumn colors and such like that. And even I caught it towards the tail end. I was looking at all the forecasts, because you guys again have forecasting based on the height of the latitude level, so you can see in relation to where it is, the predictions and stuff like that. We don't have that in Ireland, so I was able to look and go, okay, yeah, I think we've timed it right. But when we got there, it had started a small bit earlier, so I got towards the end of that. But I was amazed with the plethora of colors that I had seen. So to see that in the aspens, and again, as you say, the white trunk, the unbelievable colors that will be in the background, the uniqueness, the delicateness of the leaves and the different things you can get. And even looking at some of your images from there as well, I can see why that would be a favorite. But then to say that you can also get snow when you have all that, I mean, that is just, yeah, okay. So I want to go, that kind of way. I'd love to go back and love to be able to see that and not only see it, but also photograph it because it is an unbelievable color palette. I've never seen anything like it that you can get in the US.
Yeah, it is kind of crazy. I think I'm looking at the only print of my work that I have in the house is actually from there, and it was kind of a unique condition. It was one of those falls. I think it was maybe 2014, where there was a dramatic snow, kind of in the peak of fall color. And so the image has some evergreens at the base with some snow below them, and then above them are red aspens, gold aspens, some evergreen mixed in there, and some yellow aspens, and then some snow at the top. And it's just this layered uh, color and texture of snow and trees. And now you really can't make that photograph anymore because the evergreens at the base have grown so tall that they've covered
Oh,
up the red aspens that were behind them.
wow.
But that's the one photo that I've got printed and hanging in her home. It was just a special year that year, and just a special moment to be able to photograph that scene.
Sounds like a special place, all right. I can't blame you for having it as your favorite. And I
Yep.
think, what I'd like to do, I suppose I have one final question to ask you before I go for break, right? Which is something that I do quite a lot. And as I kind of look back retrospectively and say, okay, 5 years ago when I was taking a photograph, I didn't know what I was doing. 4 years ago, I knew a bit more. Three, I knew a bit more. Two and one, and so forth, like that. But you're looking back now from where you've come from when you first got bitten by the bug to where you are to this present day, as you say, workshop leader, you're a speaker and such like that. What would you change if you were to start all over again in regards to your photography?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think those are hard because when you start to redo decisions, I think the thing you don't know is what sort of unintended consequences might flow out of those. So, I think I'm really happy that I stayed in my primary career when I did. I enjoyed that work and was able to have some positive closure on that season of work life for me. So
Sure.
I don't know that I would have left that any earlier, in retrospect. So now I have a lot more freedom and flexibility to do as much or as little photography as I want to do. So I've got a lot of freedom with my photography now that if I had transitioned earlier, that might not be the case.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I think of the big decisions relative to my photography, I don't know that I would redo that one. If I could talk to myself 5 or 10 years ago, I would probably say, look, when you're out in the field or you're exploring locations, take a little bit more risk.
Hmm.
I think the best photographs are always when you push a little farther, you go a little harder, you go into places that make you a little bit more uncomfortable.
Hmm.
Don't take unknown risk or wildly illogical risk, but kind of move through your fears a little bit more, embrace some
Hmm.
discomfort, take on a little bit more risk. Because I think looking back over the last 10 years, the best photographs are always coming from those moments when you went into an unknown, you went into a place of discomfort, you took on a little bit more risk. So I think in general, if I could give myself advice, 10 years ago, that's what I would say.
Good advice, and good advice for today as well. Absolutely. Yeah, really, really good. So look, okay, Dusty, I've really enjoyed the, finding out the backstory in relation to it. What we're going to do is we're going to take a very quick break and be right back. I want to learn more about your approach to teaching. So we'll come back to that in a moment.
Sounds great, Darren.
If you're enjoying this episode of the Irish Photography Podcast, why not jump back and listen to the back catalogue we have of episodes, where you'll get some great insights from fantastic guests, gear reviews, lots of hints and tips, and above all else, keeping you company while you drive or relax. Thanks very much for listening. Please consider subscribing, leaving a review wherever you're listening to this podcast. And you're very welcome back to the Irish Photography Podcast. So, Dusty, like I alluded to there before the break, I'd like to learn more in relation to your approach to teaching. So, tell me a bit about it, because I think you've got quite a unique aspect and a unique view that you share with your students. So, tell me about your approach to teaching.
Yeah, well, for a new student, a new participant, the first thing that we like to do is to send them a survey. So what we want to know is, where are they in their photographic journey? Where are they on craft? Where are they on composition? What equipment do they have? What is their favorite equipment to use? What is their least favorite equipment to use? Who is their photographic inspiration? What is it that they want to learn? Are they in the midst of any photographic projects? So we want to give people an opportunity to share as much about their photographic journey as they can, so that we can understand what they might want from that 4 or 5 day experience, and how to move them forward in their photography. So that's the first piece of the puzzle. The second piece is that we've developed about 200 pages of PDF content on a range of relevant topics to landscape photography that we've tried to kind of distill down into manageable chunks of information without overwhelming anyone. And so
Okay.
we share those PDFs with them. So we feel like we're equipping them on the front end, before they arrive on a workshop, to understand what the goals are, and to understand some basics of craft and composition and personal expression. And then once the workshop is underway in the field, we've tried to prioritize time in the field. It's the one thing that you can't do from home. So we choose not to, conduct a lot of lectures, or we do a little bit of digital darkroom time, but not a ton, because we can do that after the workshop also.
Hmm.
And so we try to prioritize shooting time in the field. We want to give people an opportunity to photograph really interesting and exciting locations where they can explore a variety of compositions, and we want to give them compositional ideas. And then we want to kind of get out of their hair and let them do their own thing. People don't like, someone
On
looking
the
over their
shoulder.
shoulder and
Yeah.
telling them exactly what to do and how to do it all the time. Hey, can we help troubleshoot? Do you need ideas? And then we let them photograph, which is what I would want to do too in that same kind of scenario. And then post workshop, we do follow up online via Zoom,
Hmm.
and do image reviews and digital darkroom support as much as people want and need. So we understand that everybody has different goals. Some people are most interested in a shared group adventure. Some people want to learn about a location. Some people want to learn something new in photography. And so everybody has a little bit different set of priorities, and we try to understand what those are as best we can, and try to meet or hopefully exceed expectations when possible.
Sounds really, really good because you're investing in your students before they even become your student. And then when they're in the field, you've got the groundwork done so you can now concentrate on getting that image. But I think the bigger one, as you say, is that you're not over their shoulder, but you are there in case they need you. And that's the most important part because, you know, I've seen so many people over the years that would go on different types of workshops, and they didn't find the composition themselves. They didn't put in the settings into the camera themselves. Effectively, the instructor did it all for them in the field. So when they go back out then without the instructor, they're lost because they don't know how did they get that image. So I think it's a very, very good approach actually. Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't really help someone to do everything for them. It's sort of like either give them a fish, or teach them how to fish, right? So
Yeah.
same kind of concept. And yeah, we want people to come back with great images, right? So we want to do everything we can to make that happen, but we also want people to learn, and we want people to grow, in their photography. So if they're stuck for ideas, we'll say, hey, look, let's try a different lens, or let's improve this composition this way. But now I'm going to back away, and let you sort it out from here. And so I
Yeah.
think that most people really appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you mentioned in the first part there in relation to loving the wild and being in the wild. And it is an area, something that is becoming harder to find as times will go on, What is it about finding an area that's been off the beaten track that you love so much? And is that something that you try and encourage within your teachings and such like that with students as well?
Yeah, I think that it's an interesting season that we're in right now in landscape photography. And starting out in film, there were just a handful of books and just a little bit of information here and there about locations,
Hmm.
right? So in order to get to places, you really had to do a lot of exploring, and that's not always practical for people. So,
Yeah.
if you want to get to some places that haven't been so heavily photographed, well, then you have to get off the beaten path. And I think you can kind of leave what's already been done at other places behind, and you can really explore wild places and new places without having to think about doing something different or doing something that's been repeated so many times. I mean, hey, great, the Grand Canyon, it's wonderful, it's fantastic, and I'm not going to not photograph the Grand Canyon because it's been photographed so many times.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think if I had a choice, I'd rather try to do a backpack or get to some off the beaten path side of the Grand Canyon and do some exploring on my own rather than repeat some of the compositions that have been done from the South Rim, for example. So I don't know. I don't get too hung up on originality. I just like seeing places that are new and
Hmm.
seeing places that are wild as much as can be, and exploring new compositions. So that's fun for me, and fun for me to share those types of places with other people.
For sure, absolutely. And speaking of sharing places with people, again, you mentioned in the intro, you're an accomplished speaker. And tell me, how has that journey been so far? How did you get into the aspect of public speaking about photography, and what do you like about it, or what don't you like about it? What's the journey been like so far on that?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy that I enjoy speaking. When I was a kid, all through school, I actually hated getting it up in front of a group. I couldn't stand it. When I was a kid, I had to do a presentation in front of the entire school, and I put my book on the stand, and I was getting ready to speak, and the whole stand just fell down the stage,
Oh,
and the whole school just burst into laughter, and I think I just
wow.
froze, and I was
Yeah.
just like, oh man, this getting up in front of people is just not for me. And so I really just was like a lot of people, just didn't enjoy speaking in front of groups. I think for that reason, and I'm most landscape photographers, mostly an introverted person.
Hmm.
But fast forward through a 30-year career in university life. Well, in my role there, I'm speaking to groups almost every day. So I'm speaking to groups of students. I'm speaking to groups of faculty. I'm doing a lot of corporate training with groups of people. Just a lot of presenting to small to medium sized groups
Hmm.
of humans. And it's like a lot of things, the more you do of something, the less fear you have of it, the more comfortable that you are with it. And then I find that, working with groups of people, it's really energizing. So for me, I enjoy speaking and interacting with groups, which is ironic given how much I didn't like it
Yeah, where it
probably
started from. Yeah.
through my college years. But for photography, yeah, I mean, I think if you're passionate about something, I think that's the key. Like if you're really, really passionate about something, you can't stop talking about it.
Hmm.
Right. So
Hmm.
at that
Hmm.
point, you've got the energy, you've got the enthusiasm that I think is important to bring to a group presentation. And then I think it's just trying to structure it in a way that people can take something away from it that's useful. So you're trying to motivate people, you're trying to inspire them in some way, but at least I try to offer them something that they can apply from a practical point of view too. So it's great to go get motivated, but if you haven't really taken anything away that you can do with that, well, then what
Hmm.
do you do with the motivation?
Hmm.
So I try to weave in some motivation and inspiration and some practical takeaways for that, and I always try to follow up and give handouts for links to follow up where people can find more practical information. So for me, that's very rewarding to be able to be with a group of like-minded photographers and try to offer some inspiration and some practical tips along the way.
Fantastic. And you'd want to be comfortable doing it as well, because you've just been announced as a leader and speaker at an upcoming event. First of all, congratulations on that. Secondly, tell us, what is it?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's the Out of the Great Smoky Mountains. It's going to be a conference that's held in the spring of 2022. So that's just come online. So really excited about that. There are, I think, over a dozen instructors, people that are just some amazing photographers, and they've been instructing for a long, long time. So I'm honored to be among that group of photographers. And I would say that, late April, at least for me, it's the best time of the year to be in the park. You have a lot of water in the creeks and cascades and waterfalls. You also have wildflowers. You also have wild dogwoods that are blooming around the creeks. And of course, you have the classic stacked mountain ridges, the beautiful coves that are in the mountains as well. And the forest canopy, there is a unique period of, I don't know, maybe 1 or 2 weeks where the leaves first come out. And they have this kind of lighter, almost lime green color.
Iridescent green. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, when those leaves first come out. And so uh, to me, that late April, early May is the best time of year to be in the park. It's not as crowded that time of year either. And so to have an opportunity to really interact with a lot of amazing photographers, instructors, and like-minded photographers, I think is just fantastic. So it's never been held before in the Smokies. I'm really excited about that, and I'm looking forward to being there in April of 2022.
Yeah, I'd say it's going to be awesome. And as you say, you're going to be with a bunch of other super talented photographers. So I think the audience will get a huge mix and diversity of, speaking and teaching and stuff like that. And as you say, to go into the park at that point in time with those conditions, and obviously, hopefully, some nice light, I think it will be an excellent conference. So yeah, well done on being part of the inaugural one for sure.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. We mentioned a couple of times here about Irish Rob. So I presume his first name isn't Irish and his second name isn't Rob. So who is Rob? And tell me, you're just back from Iceland with him. So tell me all about the trip too.
So the origin story with Rob, who's been living in Dublin for 20 years now.
Okay.
Actually met him backpacking in the north of Sweden, naturally. I met him, I would say, in 2014.
Okay.
And it was odd because we were backpacking, and up there, there's really not a trail. It's just sort of rocks. And we saw this guy who was actually trying to bike pack his way over these rocks. And I just thought, I've just never seen that before. What is this guy doing? He'd throw his bike over his shoulder when the rocks got bigger, and he'd hike. And then when it kind of flattened out a little bit and he could avoid some rocks, then he'd ride his bike. And I just thought, I don't know, I got to talk to this guy. I've just never seen anybody try to do that. And so he was hiking the same direction as we were, and so staying outside the huts and tent camping, and just a really engaging and unique guy. He's sort of like a backcountry chef. He can whip up some fine dining in the backcountry like nobody's business. And so we had a great time hiking together and camping together on that particular trip. We ran into one another unplanned again, I think in Iceland in 2015, and shared a couple of days there. And have stayed in touch over the years. And wanted to plan a trip. Actually, last year, of course, we couldn't do it. Travel was shut down. And so we postponed the trip and did it this year. Yeah. And wanted to get into the interior of Iceland, a place that I had really wanted to get back to and explore much more in depth than what I'd had the opportunity to do before. And Rob was keen. He's done some interesting hikes and backpacks through that area.
Yeah.
And he said, well, yeah, right on. I'll just, ferry my Land Rover on over to Iceland from Ireland. I'm just like, how is that going to happen? So anyway, he's got this whole series of ferries that he's scheduled that brought him over there. And he's now on his way back.
Wow.
Anyway, we met up, and we had 9 days camping in the interior of Iceland, which is just a wild place that is just almost impossible to describe with words or photographs. So you just have everything there. I mean, you have glaciers, you have wild geothermals, you have moonscapes, you have waterfalls, and it was just extraordinary. And we had just an absolute total blast. And towards the end of the trip, there was an opportunity. We were hoping for an opportunity, I should say, to see the volcano going off in the southwest part of the island. And so there's like this live webcam, and it was kind of going off. And we thought, well, okay, let's we're here. We got to go for this. So we drive out there, and it's just natural, that it would be like about a 50-mile-an-hour wind.
Okay.
Just horrendous wind, right? But we're like, okay, we're gonna go anyway. So you hike up over this mountain ridge, and thankfully the wind is blowing in the right direction, so it's not blowing the poisonous gas towards you.
Straight into you, yeah.
Yeah, and so we just had a blast. It was very difficult to photograph in that amount of wind, but the volcano was indeed going off, and it was just spewing up lava out of the cone. A small cone opened up in front of it, and lava was going out there. And you looked across the lava field, and there's just lava bubbling up all across this lava field. And it was just an amazing couple of hours of photography. I'm not sure I had a whole lot of photographs that were sharp in that kind of wind, but it was just one of those once in a lifetime experiences. I mean, I've never seen anything like that before. And we were just very fortunate to be able to see the volcano being that active. And yeah, we had a complete blast. We really did.
Good stuff. You know what? Look, you're in Iceland. You have to go look at it because, I mean, a friend of mine now, he's been a guest in the podcast a couple of times, which is Thor.
Yep.
Thor Photography. I mean, he was there the day it happened, and I had him on the podcast the day after that because I wanted to hear all about it. And then there's another guy, Mike Mez, who'd gone over with them as well, and they'd been in areas that were 20 meters away from this first fissure, which you cannot get anywhere near now. And it has changed so much. It has come down, has flowed down hills, everything. I'd love to go see it. Well, I say I'd love to go see it. I would really like to have seen it when it first arrived because the uniqueness in relation to that. But the funny thing about it was, as he was telling me, he says, the amount of drones that have been lost, people flying drones over and drones melting because they got too close or they got hit by, spewing lava and such like that. You couldn't pass it up, Dusty. You have to go and look at it. It's there, but I think it's something that I've never experienced anything like that. And even right now in La Palma, which is in Tenerife, there's another volcano after going off, and that's threatening to reach the ocean and destroy quite a lot within there. So it's a powerful thing for sure. Get the right conditions, you can get some incredible photographs. But yeah, if we got 50-mile-an-hour sideways winds, and that's not very conducive to getting sharp shots anyway for a start.
Yeah, it really was an incredible experience, and the wind was just blowing so hard. You try to put the wind at your back, and I've got this new lens that I'm working with, and you got to go with a lot faster shutter speed, and it was just so hard to try to get some sharp shots. I haven't looked at all of them yet. I've uploaded everything, but
Okay.
I'm hopeful that I may have a half a dozen or so that really worked out. But yeah, it was difficult hiking to get out of there. It's uneven terrain, so you're kind of hiking on the side of a ridge. It's kind of rocky, so in that kind of wind, it's hard to kind of keep your balance and place your foot where you want it to go because the wind's blowing your whole body around. So it was just absolute craziness out there. But it was wild that you could get that close to something like that. I was just amazed.
Yeah, I know it's an incredible thing, and fair play to you for making the trip. And I think like to go to different areas in Iceland as well is a good thing to do because like when you go, as you say, to the wild areas, you're not going to rock up to the honeypot locations. Okay, they're beautiful for a reason, but you're not going to find those things, and you can create something which is of your own. And that actually brings me to the next question, I suppose, is that are you a composition guy or are you a light guy? Like there's always a balance between the two, and I'd like to hear your thoughts in relation to that, because when you go, you find a new composition, you don't find a new light, and that's where I often think about when people say, like Adam Gibbs would say, it's all about the light. Yes, but in my view, you can have great light and poor composition, or you can have a good composition and poor light. A good composition is going to win, in my opinion. But what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to agree with you on that one. I think it's always some combination of composition, of light, and perhaps an interesting subject. So if you have all three of those, sort of like three legs of a stool, you've got at least potential, if you execute the photo really well, to have something that's really compelling and really interesting and really meaningful for you. But if you have great light and an interesting subject, but there's not really a way to compose it, well, then it's not really going to be a photograph. Or maybe you do a less than stellar job with the composition, then the photograph probably is going to fail. So I think the glue, if you will, that really holds a compelling photograph together, or what really creates the photograph, is of course the composition. But a good photographer is also going to do a good job of finding a compelling subject and seeing a compelling subject. And a good photographer is probably going to be able to assess the light and find interesting and compelling light too. So the photographer is involved, with all three of those aspects. Obviously, you can't control the light, but you can pursue it and maybe find interesting light. And when we talk to people in the workshops, we say, look, find something that's visually interesting for you. What's interesting? What are you curious about? What's compelling for you? And then consider the light. Is it what direction is it coming from? And how do you want to photograph the light on that particular subject that's interesting to you? And then finally, start to work out your composition. What elements of graphic design do you want to use? And are there some compositional strategies that you can employ that are going to make the photograph express what you want it to? But find something visually interesting, find some interesting light, and then work out the composition. It doesn't always work out that way, but I think that's a good way to approach a place that you haven't been to before.
I think that's a fantastic view, actually, as you say, to have the three pillars in relation to it, because you can have a great composition, an interesting subject, but then the light is what makes it that banger image. And I think, I know that's a very, very, very good analogy. I really like that. I might have to change my view on that now after that. You never know. And another thing as well is, I've seen, when I was doing some research in relation to you, you've spoken at groups a lot before in relation to black and white photography. And why do you think that some people would overlook black and white, and how powerful can black and white be?
Yeah, I think for me, at least, black and white photography is harder. You see the world in color, so it's kind of hard to see it with your own eyes and think about how that scene might look in black and white. But that's the beauty of a lot of the modern cameras now, is you can turn them into black and white mode, and you can look at the LCD or through the viewfinder and see the scene in black and white. And I think that really helps a lot. And I think you just have to be very intentional with black and white photography. I think you have to have really strong composition skills, because you're not relying on color anymore. It's about contrast. It's about all the compositional elements. And I think it just requires more from the photographer to be able to see those compositional elements and to frame them up successfully, and to really handle, especially in the field and then in the dark room, those subtle tones, from light to dark. And I just think it's in my experience, it's not easy to do black and white photography very, very well. I think about light in terms of, there's either bold and dramatic light, and I think black and white works really well there. And I think there's also this really subtle light that's really pleasing to our eyes, and black and white can work well there. It's the kind of that light that's in between that's just not so interesting, especially in black and white. Color, you can kind of save the day if the light is just okay. But I think in black and white, you either need something bold and dramatic, or you need something that has a lot of subtlety to it that the eye can really, enjoy. So that's, I don't know, it's just harder. And I think if you don't see the world in black and white, that's just another level of sort of a barrier to overcome. But, with the camera, you can switch into black and white mode, and that will help you with your composition.
Yeah, no, I agree with you wholeheartedly in relation to that, because, you can have a scene which would lend itself perfectly to black and white. And unless you're thinking that or seeing that, you'll never even think about having a black and white image. And unless, and that's a phrase I've mentioned a number of times before, which is, if it's shite, go black and white. And what I mean by that is, you can rescue an image by going black and white, because you will have, the tonality and the contrast in relation to it. But if you go intentionally it opens up a whole different world. And I love that
Yeah.
aspect of black and white, you know?
Yeah, I think so too. And I think there's more freedom to push contrast in a black and white image than there is with color. So, if you really want jet black skies or whatever the case may be, there's freedom to do that because the image is already abstract because it's black
Hmm.
and white.
Hmm.
Whereas if you push color too far, at least in my opinion, it really degrades. The colors just get wild. I mean, if that's what you want to do, fine. But it's just for me and kind of that classic landscape foundation that I have. If
Hmm.
you push too much contrast and the colors get funky, it just kind of ruins the image. But with black and
Hmm.
white, hey, push the contrast as far as you want and see what happens. It might work out really great.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And you've also written a number of different articles for magazines and such like that. How do you approach that? Because I mean, it's going to a speaking event is one thing, going teaching in the field is another thing. But when you have to articulate that down on paper, how do you approach writing for something for magazines then?
Yeah, I think I approach writing, from the standpoint of what I would like to read. And so I
Okay.
like something that's entertaining. I like something that maybe has some humor in it, and I like a good compelling story. So I think when I'm writing something, I'm thinking about humor, I'm thinking about interesting, I'm thinking about storytelling, and I approach it that way. Writing for me is just of the things that I do. It's probably the most painful thing that I do. I'm not
Okay.
a detail person, so there's just a lot of proofreading and editing and the grammar, the spelling, the punctuation, the wording, the phrasing, and all of those things you can just kind of obsess on
Hmm.
forever and
Hmm.
forever, and the work just never gets done. So I enjoy writing, but I just find it, of the things that I do, the most sort of painstaking and the most sort of difficult and challenging. I'd much rather speak in front of a group. I can just kind of be off the cuff. I can have an outline, but I can kind of ad lib my way through a presentation and feel like I'm doing a good job. But
Hmm.
with writing, I don't know. I don't know that I have that kind of natural gift of being able to sort of draw people in and entertain them and captivate them, with the written word that some people really do so very well. I just don't think I have that. I can write factual, well organized information,
Hmm.
but it's not sort of entertaining and captivating the way a
Hmm.
really skilled writer can write. So it's probably the thing that drives me bananas the most.
Interesting. And as you say it, is it because you know, I would class most photographers anyway as visual people, you know,
Mhm.
whereas when you're writing, it's more of a kind of kinesthetic thing, you know, it's you're making the contact with the keyboard or the writing with the hand or whatever it may be, but you don't have the visual representation there to assist you writing it, but also you're putting yourself in the mindset of the reader that they could be visual too, and you have to paint that picture through the words as opposed to the power of the image bringing that to life. Would that be kind of a good analogy in it?
Yeah, I think so, and I think that's maybe why I pursue photography
Yeah.
as the primary outlet as opposed to writing. I think writing is just harder for me.
Mm,
But
mm,
I do think ultimately, when you're pursuing photography as a form of personal expression, that there's only so much a photograph can say. So I think the ideal world is to have a really strong collection of images, a group of images, and there's more storytelling opportunity with a
mhm,
group of images. And
mhm,
and if you're able to combine that group of images with a little bit of narrative, then
mm,
I think for me that's the best of all worlds. Because if you're just storytelling without any pictures, that's there's only so much you can do there. And if you're just sort of sharing a group of photos, but nobody really knows what you took, why you took them, what you hope to express through them, well, then I don't know. There's only so much that's happening there.
mhm,
But I really like the folio concept, which Brooks Jensen from Lensworks been promoting for years and years and years, which is
mhm,
just 10 or 12 images, maybe as many as 15, and sequence those, organize those, tell the story with a group of images, and then combine that with some narrative.
mm,
And for me, I love the folio concept for that reason, because I'm not having to create 100 pages of written content. I'm not having to edit 40 or 50 images. I can just distill this project down to 12 or 15 images and write a few pages of content and feel like I can communicate what I'm hoping to communicate through that particular medium.
Absolutely. And like if you think in relation to a time that we've got coming up right now, which is fall, right? So you've got an unbelievable color palette. And if
Yep.
you're talking about the color palette is one thing, you're looking at it is another thing, but a combination of the two, then it becomes a cohesive body of work that you can see what the author is mentioning by looking at the visual representation on the image that they're talking about as well. So I think absolutely, I think a combination of both is bang on. And actually, speaking of fall, it's fast approaching. So like on a scale of 1 to 11 being Spinal Tap, how excited are you?
Well, I'm very excited about getting out for fall color. I'll be hitting the road, going to Canada, going to the Canadian Rockies.
Nice.
That's our first workshop that we have coming up, and then home for one night, and then back out to Acadia, which is in Maine,
Nice.
for some fall color up there, and then flying directly from Maine out to Utah.
Wow.
So we will be seeing some cottonwoods and some fall color, out there, hopefully. But it's such a compelling, place where the fall color happens in Utah. There's so much to photograph there. So, so we'll be out for 3 weeks. So
Wow.
I'm excited about that opportunity to get to some really amazing places. On the one hand, I'm a little sort of hesitant about the travel logistics and hopeful that all those logistics will work out.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, cautiously optimistic, I think, is maybe a good way to describe where I'm at today.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you know what? Look, I'm really looking forward to seeing your images that will come from these trips. And I mean, yeah, back-to-back trips, one night home, just to charge the batteries and wash the clothes,
Yep.
and then you're back out again. So yeah, it'll be an interesting trip. Okay, I'm going to take one final break and I'm going to come back. I have 3 questions that I ask all of my guests, and I'm looking forward to hearing your answers. So I'll be right back after this. If you're enjoying this episode of the Irish Photography Podcast, why not jump back and listen to the back catalogue we have of episodes, where you'll get some great insights from fantastic guests, gear reviews, lots of hints and tips, and above all else, keeping you company while you drive or relax. Thanks very much for listening. Please consider subscribing, leaving a review wherever you're listening to this podcast. And you're very welcome back to the final part of the Irish Photography Podcast. So, Dusty, like I said, I've got 3 questions to ask all of my guests, and I'm really looking forward now to hearing your answers. So the first one in this is a funny photography story. Everybody has some. What's yours?
Yeah, I have too many, unfortunately, but I'll share one, naturally from Iceland, which was a year ago.
Okay.
So it just so happened that we were starting a workshop in Iceland last year in the midst of the second most powerful storm in the history of the North Atlantic.
Okay.
So let that sink into your brain, right?
Okay.
It was insane. So there were 100-foot high seas measured during the storm.
Nice.
And we heard from one of the glacier guides on the South Coast that the winds were measured at 150 miles an hour.
Okay.
During the storm. So it's a pretty fierce storm.
Mm-hmm.
And so as luck would have it, though, our group was able to make it in with only about a 12-hour delay. So we're still out in the field, myself and my 2 teaching buddies. And we're trying to make it back in close to the airport before the storm gets there. Well, unfortunately for us, we don't arrive before the storm.
Okay.
So we have a very simple task, which is to go from the van to the hotel lobby,
Right.
which in a normal circumstance wouldn't be a difficult or complicated task.
Mm-hmm.
However, since the storm had beat us to the hotel, it became very complicated very quickly. So I had my camera backpack on. I had 2 bags of luggage, and I had our prized possession, which was our food bag, under my arm.
Okay.
And hopeful that I could make it from the van into the lobby of the hotel where we had booked that night, so we could pick everybody up from the airport the next day. So the wind is blowing some ungodly amount. Like I can't even estimate how fast it was going, but I'm making pretty good progress towards the hotel. I'm feeling good about my odds of making it.
Okay.
And then there's another maybe 20 yards to go, but you have to turn the corner and go a little bit more into the direction where the wind is
Right.
coming from behind you now. So
Okay.
as I turn the corner, immediately the wind literally knocks my feet out from underneath me, picks
Oh,
me up into the air, and then drops me back on my backpack. So my luggage
right.
is on the ground. I've fallen on my camera backpack. I'm wondering what just happened. The food bag goes flying across the parking lot, and I'm just kind of stunned. It's just one of those moments where you try to figure out, okay, what just happened, and then
Uh-huh.
what in the heck am I going to do now? And I
Uh-huh.
kind of roll over, and I look at the hotel. And there's these giant plate glass windows, and there's like about 30 people with their face pressed to the window, looking at me like, what just happened, and what are you going to do now? And I don't know what's going on. Well, thankfully, my two teaching buddies, good buddies that they are, go straight sprinting towards me. I'm thinking to help me, but no, they don't stop. They keep going, and they rescue the food bag to
Food.
get the peanut M&Ms, which is really the thing that was much more important to them than my well-being. So thanks to their goodwill,
You
we were
saved the
able to
peanut M&M.
have peanut M&Ms that night, for dinner, and we eventually made it into the hotel lobby relatively intact.
Wow. Wow. That's some story now. And fair enough, they did get the priorities right. They did get the peanut M&Ms, right? You were able
Amen.
to get back up yourself. And I think it even went to the audience of the 30 people as well, probably gave them a round of applause because they went and got the food bag, yeah?
Yeah, we should have shared some. I guess we overlooked that opportunity, but yeah, we somehow did make it in. But man, that was just crazy, And I remember at the very first trip that my wife and I made to Iceland back in, I think, 2005. We were flying home. We looked out the window and we saw luggage literally flying through the air across the world. It wasn't even touching the runway. We're talking
Mm-hmm.
about 60, 75-pound bags hypothetically. They
Mm-hmm.
are literally cartwheeling
Wow.
through the air over the top of the runway. I just thought, wow, I sure hope we make it home.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's a very, very good story. And, it's interesting because I heard your name when I had David on the podcast and he mentioned, you and his funny story. So, that's a good one. I think it's, they got the priorities right. Let's be fair. You know what I mean? You had to make sure you had the sustenance there and that they could actually laugh at your misfortune as well. So yeah, it was, it was a good one. And you said,
Exactly.
you said you had your backpack on your back. So that's actually the next question, which is, what gear do you use? So what do you shoot with?
Yeah. So, gosh, since forever, I was shooting Canon all the way back to the EOS 3 days,
You
and
didn't
then
move away
transitioned
from
into
Canon.
digital.
You didn't move away
And
from Canon.
and then, right, about a year ago, I
Right.
got hooked on the GFX system, and
Oh, okay.
yeah, it's just been fabulous. There's just something about those files coming off that larger sensor. The quality is just amazing. The color is spot on. There's
Mm-hmm.
extraordinary detail. There's great dynamic range. I kind of like that old school feel of shooting that kind of gear,
Mm-hmm.
in the
Mm-hmm.
field.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I switched over to GFX system, not without a lot of thought and consideration, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Last fall, so I've shot with it, I don't know, about a half a dozen times since then, but really just fell in love with the system. So love Canon, still a big fan of Canon, and of course we have participants shooting all sorts of gear, Sony, Nikon, and other gear. But man, I'm really really happy with the GFX system. I had a hard time, to be honest, shooting the 250 in that kind of wind. I don't do a lot of long lens photography, so there were a number of
Mm-hmm.
shots that I'm pained to say that
Mm-hmm.
didn't work out because I just didn't have a fast enough shutter speed. With that high wind,
Yeah.
the lens is
Yeah.
still shaking, so you're trying to maybe figure out, well, hey, should I switch on the lens IS or not? Or should I just keep that off and go with a faster shutter speed? So I don't have a lot of experience shooting with a longer lens, and a number of those shots just didn't work out. But hey, you learn something as you go. But I'm a big fan of that system and just really love those files.
And what glass do you use?
I have the 23 prime, the 250 prime, and then I shot a lot with the 3264. I didn't take the 100-200, so I only took just the three lenses in my bag. But
Okay.
yeah, I shot a ton with that 32 to 64. And but yeah, all those lenses are just amazing. I mean, the detail is just it's just incredible.
Absolutely. And then the last question I have for you is what shoes or what feet do you put those on? So what type of tripod do you use?
Yeah, so forever, I guess, I've been using Kirk ball heads that just seem to be impossible to break. I've banged them on rocks and had them in sand and salt water and all those kinds of things. So Kirk ball heads and Gitzo tripods. So I know a lot of people have very strong opinions, but for me, those two pieces of gear have held up over time, and I'm pretty rough on my gear. So I've been maybe just fortunate that those two pieces of gear have worked really well for me over time.
Yeah, you know what? Gear is to be used. It's not to be,
Yep.
wrapped up in bubble wrap. It's to be used, and I've a Gitzo tripod myself, and I often said, that they always say, don't meet your heroes, because I always had high expectations in relation to it. Now, I often question why it's so expensive, but I've had situations, because obviously in Ireland here we get similar winds to the Icelandic aspect, but it's constant coming off the Atlantic, and I'm a seascape photographer in my heart, and I won't bring that near the sea because I don't want it to get it destroyed from the salt. But if I'm at the coast, I will absolutely swear by it, because there will be no movement in relation to it. And having solid feet is really, really important, as you say, in relation to the shake.
It's key. It's probably the one thing that we see on workshop the most that the group could probably improve their gear on. If you've got a great camera and great lenses, but then you don't have a ball head or tripod or an L bracket, it's tough. It's just tough from there.
You put $10,000 on top of a Walmart $55.99. That ain't going to work out. You know what I mean?
It's not going to end well.
Yeah, it's not going to end well. And then the third question I have for you is our VSP. So it's a very solid product. It's a product you will not leave home without. You'd put your name to it if you could. What's yours?
Yeah, so I actually got three things that I never leave home without. One of them is this Leatherman multi-tool. So knife blade, screwdrivers, pliers. I never leave home without that. Software, Gaia GPS on the phone. You can download those maps from literally around the world. You can look at tracks, plan routes ahead of time, waypoints ahead of time. Gaia GPS, in my opinion, is worth its weight in gold. And if you've ever suffered mercilessly while traveling from a stomach virus or food poisoning event, there's a prescription med called Zofran. That's at least a brand name here in the US. And I absolutely refuse to travel without that medication in my bag. It just takes one experience like that when you're traveling. And I'll tell you what, that particular medication is just a miracle. It is a wonder. It just, for me, at least my one experience of having that travel bug, it just shut it off like a faucet. It was extraordinary. So I don't leave home without those three things.
Okay. Yeah, they're three good VSPs. So we'll allow you to have the three on this one. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, good.
So, that's all of my questions done. I suppose all I have to do now is really kind of the wrap ups, So like, what's next for you, and where can people find more information on you?
Yeah. So what's next for me is, we're going to have a pretty full fall workshop schedule.
Yeah,
So fall of
lucky you.
2021. And then we'll kick off 2022 with Lofoten, a couple of workshops in New Mexico, and then the Smokies Conference coming up in April of 2022. And we're expecting to release our second half of 2022 workshops here in the next week or so. So we'll be looking forward to going back to some of our favorite places in Colorado and Utah and back to Maine. So I'm looking forward to that. And over the next year, I'm looking forward to doing some more speaking, getting back on that circuit, and looking forward to engaging in a little bit more print sales. So got a lot to look forward to, I think.
Yeah. And actually, something that comes out of that, actually. Has Rob ever told you come to Ireland and take photographs in Ireland, no?
Well, we actually did. We actually, in 2019, I guess late summer, we jumped in his trusty Land Rover Defender, and he actually drove us around Ireland. So we circumnavigated clockwise.
Okay.
And we camped part of the way. We had just a complete blast. My wife was able to join us, and she had a wonderful time. And man, I'm really, really eager to get back to Ireland. It just, man, just a beautiful landscape, wonderful people, wonderful culture, had some great food. We got to meet Norm McCloskey and his gallery in
Oh yeah,
Kildare.
Norm.
That
Yeah,
was a
yeah,
real treat,
yeah.
So that was cool. And yeah, we just had a wonderful time, and we were actually planning to go back last year, but of course couldn't. And hopefully we'll get back to Ireland in the next year or two. So I'm really eager to get back there.
Well, if you do come back anyway, don't come in the summertime. Come in either September or come in March, because you'll get some good storms that will come in then, and that'll give you some good conditions on the wild Atlantic. And of course, let me know, I suppose, when you're coming over, sure, and we'll hook up. It's been, like it's a roller coaster ride when you think about Ireland, because it's kind of under the radar.
Mm-hmm.
Like everybody goes to Iceland, everybody goes to Lofoten and such like that, and the
Right.
Faroes now, but we have quite a lot. I'm saying it all the time. I'm always kind of an advocate for Ireland. I mean, even, David, when I was on his podcast as a guest, and can he call me an ambassador for Ireland, because I do love my country, but I say that we've got so much to offer, except for two things. We don't have rainforests and we don't have deserts. That's it.
Right.
But like
Right.
when you want to have a wild coastal area, yeah, the wild Atlantic way, as you know, is a phenomenal spot. And where can people find more information on you?
Yeah, absolutely. They can find more information about me at my website, which is just simply dustydoddridge.com. So it's a lot of D's.
Hmm. Hmm.
But yeah, find me on the website and email me or message me if there's anything that I can do for folks and their photography.
Well, Dusty, it's been an absolute pleasure meeting the man, the myth, the legend. I didn't even believe that you existed when, when your name was mentioned. So I'm delighted to have you on. Thank you very, very much. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I've loved hearing your story, and I've loved your approach in relation to your craft as well. And like I say, look, if you're ever coming to Ireland, let me know, and yeah, we'll hook up. It's been a great. Thanks very much for coming on.
Well, thank you very much, Darren. I really enjoyed it and really appreciate the opportunity to be on the podcast with you. And hopefully we can do it again down the road.
Sure, man. Sure. So we have a phrase in Ireland, which is, in Irish, it's Oscuelga, and it says bye for now. And I say it at the every end of every podcast, so it's Slán go fóill. So from me to you, Slán go fóill.
Hey guys, if you dig what you're hearing, why don't you jump over to iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Give us a 5-star rating and don't forget to share with your friends. With all that done, we'll see you next week, and remember, keep shooting.